In this short talk, I'm going to review a couple models for how we can understand wellness. Wellness is a broad and complex topic that involves many different things, and these two models are bigger, more holistic ways of approaching wellness and ways that we can understand the experiences of wellness that we live. The first is the Indivisible Self. So this was developed by Myers and Sweeney. And the Indivisible Self is a holistic and evidence-based model that really considers all of the different aspects of the self, of the individual, and how these can contribute to our wellness. So in this model, wellness is described as a higher order factor, which have many kind of broken out parts. So different concepts, or what this model calls factors. So there are 5 second order factors: the creative self, the physical self, the essential self, the social self, and the coping self. And each of these have a variety of other factors or wellness dimensions which contribute to them. So importantly, all of these constructs and concepts exist across the lifespan, and they change or may be influenced by different contexts in which the individual lives. So this model is really based on psychology and individual psychology and the different aspects of the individual that influence their wellness. So this is the model here, and here we can see these 5 higher order factors which make up the indivisible self, or all aspects of the individual. Around each of the higher order factors, we see the wellness dimensions which contribute to them. So I won't go through all of them, as you can see them here, and you can check out the article this is taken from, linked in the description. But I'll just point out a few important ones. We see things like the physical self, which makes reference to our physical health, so activities such as exercise and nutrition, alongside more subjective experiences like the essential self, so things like spirituality, gender identity, cultural identity, and self-care. Also notably, we see here that leisure is one of the wellness dimensions linked under the coping self. So the ability to change and live through and experience adversity. So as noted before, all of these wellness factors and higher order factors exist in different contexts, and these different contexts will influence how well the individual is, based on how they support or don't support these different dimensions or factors. So the model identifies 4 different contextual factors to include. So we have the local, the institutional, the global, and the chronometrical. So the local is those contexts that we are most intimately involved in. So things like our friends and our families and those close people in our communities. The institutional context refers to larger organizations that shape the way we live. So things like education or healthcare, or the other social kind of structures that we live in and rely on for a lot of our social organization. The global context are these kind of higher order ideas, so things like politics and culture, things that we see that may be further away from us but still very much have bearing on the way that we live. And finally, we have the idea of chronometrical context, which means that as we move through our lifespan, these different factors and experiences will change, just as the context will change. So not only do we have 3 levels of context, we also have a time span context that we must consider as well. So to put this kind of into example, I will take the example of a young person who may be trying to figure out their sexuality or their queer identity. In their local context, they may have a family who's very supportive and welcoming of that. In an institutional context, they may live in a society or a social organization where this is supported in some ways through things like basic rights or things like equal marriage. But they may attend a school that doesn't necessarily have policies or practices in place where to protect them from the ideas or maybe negative impacts that some of their peers may be having on them. On the global scale, they may see images such as pride parades and governments touting their country as a safe haven or welcoming place for them to be. And then chronometrically, as this person moves through their lives, they may change this, or these different contexts may change, and the way they view and understand this identity may change as they move as well. So this kind of experience would have implications for several of these different higher order factors, but most notably the essential self, as well as likely the social self. Next, we're going to talk about the leisure and well-being model. So this is a strengths-based and service-oriented model. So it was developed specifically in the context of therapeutic recreation. So people who are providing leisure-based services as part of service provision contexts. And this model considers how leisure contexts, so how leisure specifically, can help develop well-being, and how someone working in leisure context or working in leisure provision can work to develop resources which then will influence well-being. And importantly, this is a cyclical model. So it describes the way that building resources can then contribute to well-being, which will then contribute to our positive affect and the expression of our potential, which then will enhance our leisure further. And so it's a cyclical model that continues to feed into itself. So here's the diagram here, which I've pulled from the Carruthers and Hood article where this was developed. And here we can see what this cycle looks like. So on the left, we have components of the therapeutic recreation service delivery. There are some strategies for enhancing leisure experiences, so the way that these experiences can be enhanced in that service provision context. And then in that context, the goal is then to develop these different resources. So these are concepts related to our psychology, our social interactions, the cognitive processes, our physical resources, and environmental resources. And these may look pretty similar to some of the other constructs that we just saw in the Indivisible Self. And what this model describes is that by enhancing these experiences and developing these resources, we will then enhance our well-being, which is described as a state of successful, satisfying, and productive engagement with one's life and the realizations of one's physical, cognitive, and social emotional potential. In turn, this leads to positive affect and emotions and experiences that we have in the leisure context, as well as the expression of our full potential and satisfaction with our achievements. And then the model proposes that these experiences then feed back into our leisure experiences and allow us to continue to build on that to further enhance our well-being. So both of these models present different ways of conceptualizing wellness, and both of them have leisure implicated in different ways. It's important to note that different models may be more suited to certain contexts. So we see here that the leisure and well-being model is specifically suited for a therapeutic recreation context, whereas the Indivisible Self is more broad and considers larger, not only the local and institutional context, but also global context and chronometrical context as well. If you're interested in reading up further on these two articles are linked below. Both are available through Google Scholar. If you search these terms here, you can look them up and read the full details on their development and how they can be employed.